In this video, we'll write the addClass, removeClass, and hasClass functions that jQuery provides, but in plain JavaScript. We know that the addClass, removeClass functions add or remove a class name from the list of classes in the class attribute of an HTML element. And the hasClass function checks for the presence of a certain class in the list of classes of an HTML element. I have this example to demonstrate what I'm talking about. This web page has a CSS file beneath it with two classes, one that colors the text green and another that colors the text red, with the names success and error respectively. I have two buttons. If I click this button, it generates the text in green, basically applying the first class to this piece of text. This one applies the other class. I'll first write this thing using jQuery, and then we'll rewrite this using plain old JavaScript. I'll start with an h1 element that has the ID message and have two buttons. I'll include a CSS file that has these two classes. And to start with, I'll use jQuery and a custom script that uses the jQuery functions. In the document.ready function, I'll call a function called setup, which will set up the event handlers for the two buttons. In each of the event handlers, I'll get a reference to the jQuery element representing the h1 with the ID message. Since this is a jQuery object, it'll have access to the functions addClass and removeClass. In the success click handler, I'll add the success class and remove the error class. And I'll set the text appropriately. I'll do the exact same thing in the other handler. The only difference, I'll need to add the error class and remove the success class. And with a slightly different message. This is the complete jQuery example. Let's run it and see if it works. And it works. You will notice in the console, this is the target h1 element. If I click the success button, it removes the error class and adds the success class. But if I click the button again, it doesn't add the success class again, which indicates that the jQuery addClass method checks for the presence of the class already. If the class already exists, it doesn't add the class. jQuery also has a function named hasClass that helps us check for the presence of a certain class in the class list. Now we will write the addClass, removeClass, and hasClass functions using plain old JavaScript. The document.ready in plain old JavaScript is denoted by an event on the document object, the event being called DOM content loaded. I'll call the setup function in that event. I'll wire these handlers in the plain old JavaScript way. In the event handlers for each of the buttons, instead of using the jQuery function to retrieve the element, I'll use document.getElementById, and that'll return a plain HTML element and not a jQuery object like this one returns. Now, since this is a plain HTML DOM element, it wouldn't have these functions. So let's write these functions. Any HTML element has a base interface called HTML element. As you can see from this pop-up or tooltip, that this is of type HTML element. That's the base DOM interface that all HTML elements implement. And we can cross-check that for now. I'll comment out these lines. I'll look at the JavaScript to see that we have the new incomplete JavaScript, and we do. We can select a certain element and we can do a few things just to reflect on this element. If I type off, that's not going to help me a lot because everything in JavaScript is simply an object, and JavaScript is dynamically typed, and there's no specific object that represents DOM elements. These are base interfaces. HTML element is an interface in C++. That's written in C++. So this is just an object, but I can also query it for its constructor name, and that's going to give me the specific, most derived interface that this object implements. This object is an H1, and it rightly says it's an HTML heading element. That's the interface this object implements. But this also, if you check on Google or MDN, this would inherit from a baser interface called HTML element, and we can cross-check that by asking it, are you an instance of HTML element? And it returns true. So if I were to add the methods addClass, removeClass, and hasClass on an HTML element, or the prototype of the HTML element class, that would make it available to all HTML elements. Let's do that. And this would just take a class name. Similarly, I'll have the removeClass method, and I want to have a hasClass. The addClass is pretty simple to write. The crux of addClass is, I'll first check if this class already doesn't exist in the elements class list, only then add it. So to do that, I'll just call our yet non-existent but soon to be written function hasClass. I'll say if element.hasClass, in fact, if not element, if not this dot hasClass, only then do the thing that's going to add this class to the list of classes of this element. Now there are two ways to do it. The most direct way is to simply concatenate this string to the list of classes that this class attribute has. And the attribute class of an HTML element is denoted by a JavaScript property named className. So className gives me access to the attribute, class attributes value, and to that if I would just append the string, but I can't just append this, I need a space in between, so a space plus className, this argument className. Or I can write this as an interpolated string with a backtick, a space, and the expression this way. That's one way of doing it. There's another way which I'll show you, but first let's run this and see if it works. Let's complete this code first in the event handler and see if this works. So if I were to add this class, to complete this I also need to write the hasClass method. JavaScript, the DOM API provides a property named classList on every HTML element that contains a list of all the classes available. So I can just return if this .classList contains this class name, and that completes my hasClass method. The removeClass, let's write the removeClass also, and then we'll go back and test this. The removeClass would be pretty similar. I'd say remove it only if this .hasClass, this class name, only then this .classList. To remove it, I could search the whole string denoted by class name and then expurge this class name from that string and construct a new string, or I could use this class list property itself. And this has a method called remove that just lets me remove this. I'm sorry, I forgot to pass this argument here. That completes these three methods in plain old JavaScript, but we're not done yet. Let's write the rest of these event handlers in plain old JavaScript. This will work as a chained call in this Fluent API syntax only if I were to return the element itself from each of these methods. And that's simple. I can return this from each of these methods. The hasClass returns a boolean, so I don't need to return the object from here. And that should work now. And as for setting the text with plain old JavaScript, I'll set the inner text property to this piece of text. Similarly, I can change the other method along the same lines. This should work as it is even now. Let's give it a try. I'll check the debugger to see if we have the latest code. And we do have the latest code because I'm returning this object from these two. And I'm calling the inner text property to set the text. If I run this now, does it work? I'm sorry, I have a typo. In the removeClass method, I have this typo, which is the C should be capital. Let's reload the code. And it should work now. And it does. Now, we can still make one more change, or I can show you one other alternative of writing this addClass method. I could add the same thing. Instead of concatenating the string, an alternative is to use the class list's add method. So I could, instead of saying this, I could just say add this to the class list of the same element. So the class list provides a convenient syntax for this. With this change, let's try out our new code. Let's see if I have the new code. Yes, I do have the new code where I'm using the class list in the addClass method, and the code still works perfectly fine. There's one last thing I would like to introduce to you, and that is, let's do it the way, let's have a look at the jQuery source code to see how they've written the hasClass method or any of these methods, and let's compare it with what we've written and see if we can make any improvements in our code. And to look at the jQuery source, you can go to GitHub, to the jQuery repository in GitHub, or you go to Google. A better way to look at jQuery source, there are two websites I'll tell you about. One, if you type in Google jQuery source viewer, you get to this website by James Padolsey. I don't know if I have his name pronounced correctly. Forgive me, James. This is a great website. It lets you select a version of jQuery and add or type in any function name, for instance, hasClass. And this is the implementation. You can focus on this one and you can look at how they did it. And this makes it much easier to study any source code in jQuery. And you can, for example, if you've got bipolar disorder, okay, sorry, these are different themes that you can choose from to look at the code. And another website to do the same thing is, I don't remember the website name, but if you go to Google and type jQuery deconstruct source or something, that's not the one. This is the one, Dave Stewart IO. Here's the jQuery source. He's got each function here. If you click on the name of the function, it lets you look at the function with the syntax highlighting. So I'm going to look at hasClass, and that's the same implementation that we're looking at over here. So what this does, let's use let's study what they do. In fact, let me just tell you what they do without wasting your time. What jQuery guys do instead of using this class list is they say get the current property value of the class attribute of an element. So if this ID, if this element already had a few classes, say apple, orange, pear, then what they say is get me the element's class name and find out if this list or if this string contains this string. So there is a method on string object called index of. If I say if it doesn't contain it, it'll be -1, otherwise it'll be a value greater than -1 from 0 to the length of the string. So all I have to say is please return that this one is greater than -1. That's the crux or the soul of what they're doing, with a few modifications or few validations and checks in place. I'll just go over each of those checks until we arrive at something similar to what they're doing. So this is the heart and soul of what they're doing, except this doesn't cater for, in HTML you can actually write this like this and nobody's going to stop you or put you in jail, and you can write this with new lines in between and also with tab stops in between. I could have a banana here, and if you had a class name or a class attributes value written like that, that would be perfect HTML. So this code needs to be able to cater to that. So it says before you actually search for this class name within the string, do something to the string. Please replace any occurrence of, so I'm going to write a regular expression here. In JavaScript, regular expressions are written in between two forward slashes, and I'm going to say any occurrence of a new line character or a tab character, and I'm going to put a G after this. The G indicates please replace all occurrences and not just the first occurrence of any of these characters with a space, so that any such thing becomes a space delimited list like this. And then one more thing they do is, what if the class you were looking for in this element had this class list and you were looking for the presence of a class named app, not just apple, just app, and our class function, this implementation would match and say yes, it already has the app class, because it would not check for word boundaries. So we need to make sure that the apple is a separate word. So instead of actually using this, I'll say not in this string, but in a string where this is surrounded by spaces, first surround this with spaces and then replace any occurrence of this in this. Now this is a string literal, so I intended to use an interpolated string, so I'll enclose this in this expression in curlies. So this is the meat and potatoes of their implementation. You intersperse or you wrap this current value of the class attribute with a space and replace any occurrences of new lines and tabs with a space, and then check for the presence of this string. And this should work. Well, the test of the pudding is in the eating, they say. So actually, rather than comparing it with the jQuery source, let's actually just run this and see if it works. Okay, I have the new source. If it works, that means we've got it right. Yes, it works, and we've got it right. And this is close to, in fact, this is exactly what they're doing. They're interspersing or wrapping around the class name with a space each, and then replacing the occurrence of a new line or a tab element, all such occurrences, with a space, and then trying to find the class name. And if it is greater than 1, that means the element has the class. And they do it in a for loop because they're doing it for many elements. As you know, in jQuery, in a selector, you can pass any number of class names. If you want to become a computer programmer, If you're not already one, if you want to switch careers, you could be doing something else for now, and if you want to become a computer programmer for a living, or if you're already a computer programmer, you've just joined the industry and you feel lost and you need a mentor to teach you your way around, or if you've just finished college and you don't have a job and you want to learn computer programming even though you may have learned it in college, then I will be starting an online course in which I'll teach you computer programming over a considerably long period of time. And this will not be a series of videos you have to watch, it'll be me teaching you every other day or so for a couple of hours a day. If you'd like to be informed of when the course is launched, please go to my website satyaish.net, scroll down to the bottom and join the mailing list, and I'll be able to send you an email as soon as I announce the course on the website.